A fear that begins as a pattern, repeated across media, wars and laws. Different decades, different enemies, different headlines, same narrative. What if Islamophobia isn't about religion at all, but about power, money, and control? That's where this investigation begins. Islamophobia isn't random. It was strategically constructed, built layer by layer, and fed to you through discrete psychology. Stay with this investigation until the end. When AI examines how this system was created and the final analysis unfolds, the result isn't what most people expect. Welcome to AI Code of Faith. For the first time in human history, AI was asked to investigate a question many avoid. Why does Islamophobia exist, and who benefits from it? No assumptions, no emotions, no biases, just cold, factual analysis. In this video, we'll uncover how fear became a political tool, how the media turned stereotypes into stories, how an entire system of prejudice toward Islam and Muslims was built through decades of storytelling, and why, after all the scaremongering, Islam still remains the fastest growing religion in the world. But before we open the evidence files, support this investigation. Like, share, and subscribe, because every click pushes this research closer to someone searching for truth. Islamophobia didn't come out of nowhere. Its roots reach back to the Crusades, the long rivalry between European powers and the Ottoman Empire, and later the era of colonial rule. During those periods, European governments portrayed Muslim societies as backward or uncivilized, not as casual insults, but as political tools meant to justify conquest and control. Later, Orientalist writers and artists took those ideas and turned them into books, paintings, and academic claims that shaped how the West imagined the Muslim world. Images of an exotic East, school lessons that painted Islam as primitive, violent, and irrational. These ideas spread quietly but deeply through Western culture. What's striking is how familiar this language sounds, and the AI analysis at the end of this video will show us why. These narratives didn't disappear with time. They simply changed their language and found new platforms. In the 20th century, increased immigration brought communities into shared spaces. People lived side by side, worked together, and the idea of coexistence became normal. But then, a new wave of events shifted the mood again. Something that took those old fears, dusted them off, and turned them into fresh political fuel. And this time, fear wasn't just cultural, it became strategic. People often think Islamophobia started on 9/11. It didn't. That moment supercharged it, but the groundwork was already laid by the following series of geopolitical events. Iranian Revolution in 1979 changed how the West viewed the Middle East. Many Iranians felt the Shah of Iran was serving Western interests more than his own people, so they overthrew the monarchy and replaced it with an openly anti-Western government. This surprised Western countries, and soon their media and leaders began portraying Iran as irrational, fanatical, and dangerous. What mattered wasn't what Iran did, but how fear could now be framed. This image helped create the idea of an Islamic threat. It allowed them to justify supporting Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. It also gave them a reason to focus heavily on protecting oil routes in the Persian Gulf, which were vital to their economies. And in a time when the Cold War was beginning to shift, it helped the West find a new kind of enemy to unite against. In many ways, the revolution didn't just change Iran. It changed how the entire world talked about the Middle East and Islam. In the late 1970s, the world was locked in the Cold War. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were fighting for influence without fighting each other directly. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the US saw an opportunity. Instead of sending its own soldiers, America backed Afghan fighters, the Mujahideen, who were resisting the invasion. These fighters were Muslim, and at the time, the story told to the public was very different from what we hear today. They were called freedom fighters. Heroes standing up to a powerful empire. Same people, different narrative. The strategy worked. The war badly weakened the Soviet Union and helped push it toward collapse. In return, the US gained influence in the region and built close ties with Pakistan's intelligence services. The key lesson is simple. In global politics, the image of Muslims changes with political needs. One decade they're heroes, the next they're portrayed as threats. During the Gulf War, Iraq was portrayed as barbaric, unpredictable, and a threat to global stability. This framing made it seem like the region couldn't be trusted to handle itself. Because of that fear, the US justified a long-term military presence in the Gulf, protected its allies, and kept control over important oil routes. From then on, the whole region started being seen as unstable and threatening, an idea that became even stronger after 9/11. After 9/11, the war on terror began. Slowly, Islam started being linked with violence and extremism, not always openly, but through new security laws, political speeches, news stories, and movies. Post 9/11, Hollywood flattened Muslim characters into an extremist stereotype and treated Muslimness as a risk factor. Bollywood followed a different but parallel path, with Muslims increasingly portrayed as terrorists or anti-nationals and disproportionately framed as internal threats, fueling Islamophobia by normalizing fear and suspicion and training audiences to associate Muslim identity with danger. That fear made people support wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, even though many were against them at first. It also allowed governments to greatly increase surveillance and security, and trillions of dollars flowed into the defense industry. Pause and let that sink in. Fear didn't just change opinions, it rewrote laws. Then came the Arab Spring. Some uprisings were praised as democratic, others were branded Islamist threats, depending on political interests. That logic was used to justify military action in Libya, support authoritarian allies, and shut down groups that challenged Western influence. Fear made these decisions easier to sell to the public. Governments don't rely on Islamophobic narratives because of hatred. They rely on them because they're effective. When Muslim regions are portrayed as dangerous or unstable, wars start to look defensive rather than aggressive. A common enemy is created. Public opposition fades, even as governments spend over $8 trillion on war. Fear also gives governments more power. Laws like the USA Patriot Act enabled mass surveillance that the public would never have accepted under normal circumstances. So why are Muslim-majority regions framed this way so consistently? Because the strategic stakes are huge. These regions hold nearly half of the world's oil reserves, over 40% of global gas supplies, and control key trade routes like the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage through which about 1/5 of the world's oil moves every day. In return, governments gain political careers built on appearing tough on terror. Fear isn't accidental. It's a political tool, and AI will test that claim at the end. The media runs on one simple rule: fear sells. Complex global conflicts are reduced to one lazy label: Islamic extremism. A bombing becomes a religion, a criminal becomes a symbol, 1 billion people become a stereotype. Our brains do the rest. We remember the most dramatic images, we look for information that confirms our fears, and form negative associations without realizing it. Social media doubles the effect. Algorithms reward outrage, misinformation spreads faster than truth, and negative content consistently outperforms positive stories. Some studies show that attacks committed by Muslims can receive up to 1,000% more coverage than similar attacks by non-Muslims. The result is a false impression that Muslims are more violent, even when the data says otherwise. On top of that, the media flattens 1.8 billion people into a single identity, ignoring the fact that Islam isn't a race. Muslims exist across every race, culture, and language. Humans have a habit of splitting the world into us and them by default. Communities that showed the highest levels of anti-Muslim sentiment were those with no real exposure to Muslims. It became easy for them to believe stereotypes planted by decades of storytelling by the media. When you never meet real people, fiction fills the gap. Often unfamiliarity feels like a threat, so practices like hijab and modesty become misunderstood. But beneath all this, hidden in the background, is another layer rarely discussed, the economic one. Islam is not just a belief system, it is a complete way of life, a system that governs behavior, ethics, and restraint, finance, family life, consumption, entertainment, and social behavior. And that's where the friction begins, because these values collide directly with multi-trillion-dollar industries. If Islamic ethics were widely adopted, the economic impact would be enormous. The global alcohol industry, worth around $1.8 trillion, would collapse under a prohibition on intoxicants. The pornography industry, valued at roughly $97 billion, would lose both traffic and advertising revenue. Gambling, a $712 billion industry spanning casinos, lotteries, and online betting, would be fundamentally invalid. Tobacco, an $850 billion market, would see demand fall sharply due to Islam's prohibition on consuming anything that causes bodily harm. This isn't a moral theory anymore. This is lost revenue. The most disruptive impact would be on global finance. Islamic law forbids interest, a rule that directly challenges a global debt system worth over $130 trillion. Traditional banking models would fail, high-leverage derivatives would become illegitimate, and finance would be forced to shift towards Islamic structures like mudaraba and musharaka. These systems are based on fair partnership, where profit and risk are shared equally between banks and clients, instead of earning guaranteed interest. This wouldn't be a small reform, it would be a system-level transformation. The impact wouldn't stop with finance. Industries built on sexualization, music, explicit entertainment, and advertising that profit from desire, impulsivity, and excess would all be affected. That's because Islam promotes a very different set of values: discipline, modesty, self-restraint, charity, justice, and protection from harm. Modern economies, by contrast, are driven by addiction, debt, and endless consumption. And this is why Islam is framed as a threat, not because of theology, but because of economics. When money is at risk, politics get involved. The media amplifies fear, and prejudice is shaped into laws, policies, and public narratives designed to control the threat. Before we conclude, we return to the question that framed this entire investigation. How was artificial intelligence used here? We didn't ask AI for beliefs, opinions, or conclusions. We used it as an analytical instrument, applying pattern recognition, counterfactual modeling, incentive mapping, and cross-temporal consistency analysis. AI analyzed historical texts, political rhetoric, media framing, policy outcomes, and economic indicators. It compared narratives across centuries, tested competing hypotheses, and filtered them by probability. The result was clear. The patterns were too consistent to be accidental, too aligned to be random, and too economically precise to be driven by theology or culture. In short, Islamophobia was created as a systemic emergence because it served political power, economic interests, and control. Islamophobia is not a misunderstanding waiting to be corrected. It is not a cultural accident. It is not rooted in theology. It is a mechanism that converts fear into consent. Consent for wars that would otherwise be rejected. Consent for economic systems that profit from conflict, addiction, debt, and endless desire. And here is the paradox. The Islamic values labeled dangerous are only dangerous because they form a coherent system, a complete moral framework, a structured way of life, an ethical ideology, no different from liberalism and communism, with its own code of morality and vision of social justice. Once the lens changes, everything shifts. Wars stop looking defensive. Headlines stop looking neutral. Narratives stop looking accidental. The real question was never why Islamophobia exists. It's what would collapse if people actually lived by Islam. And to understand why, despite decades of scaremongering, people continue to believe, watch why people believe in Islam. Because once you understand that, every headline makes sense.